today I'm going to talk to everybody about 5 steps to hearing God's voice. Okay, 5 steps to hearing God's voice. Now I'm going to introduce a concept to you. Okay, a lot of people probably don't think that hearing God's voice is very important. All right, but just consider this for a second, right? Consider this for a second. You know who Liu Kang is from Mortal Kombat, right? You've seen his hair. He has some really good hair, right? What if Liu Kang got surrounded by a certain amount of people, right? Surrounded by some women or some other hairdressers or what have you, and they saw his hair and they encouraged him to be a hairdresser instead of a fighter, and say he became reasonably successful at it. How would he know that he's supposed to be Liu Kang, okay, turn into a dragon and win the Mortal Kombat tournament? How would he know if all the people around him are telling him that's what he's supposed to do and he's reasonably successful at it? In fact, if he wanted to start fighting, they would object to it. You see what I'm saying? So that's why it's important, okay, to have some sort of vehicle to connect to God, some sort of vehicle to connect to his presence. Okay, so that's why I'm gonna deal with hearing God's voice. Okay, now that's not to say that if you don't hear God's voice, you're not an awesome Christian or a good Christian or not saved. That's not what I'm trying to suggest at all. But what I'm trying to suggest is that if you are able to truly hear God's voice, it is a very useful vehicle in you connecting to God and finding what he wants you to do in your individual life. Okay, so now I'm gonna get started with the steps. The first step, hearing God's voice, is use what you have. You gotta use what you have. Whether that's the scriptures, studying the scriptures as good as you can, okay, keeping your thoughts according to scripture as much as you can, okay. That's why I talk about in 2 Corinthians 10:5, taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, okay. You applying whatever scriptures you know, you applying whatever knowledge you have, you applying whatever common sense you have, even things on your conscience, specific convictions and things like that. Utilizing what you have, because if you don't get this step right, utilizing what you have, you'll come out here and think you're prophesying or something crazy, okay, and then you led by the doctrines of demons because you didn't utilize what you had. You weren't faithful to where you were at, okay. That's why you have to be, just like what Jesus says, faithful in the small things, and he'll make you ruler over many things later on, but you have to be faithful in the small first, okay, faithful in the few things first, okay. So that's my first step, right? So my second step, okay, in hearing God's voice, okay, my second step is clearing out space, okay, clearing out space. This is a very important aspect, okay, because one of the things that you have to do in order to get with God, in order to connect with God, in order to sustain a relationship, you have to have space. You got to have space, and I mean time space, I mean mental space, I mean time to stop thinking, time to get some things out of the way. See, a lot of people, they're not able to hear God's voice because they got too much going on in their mind already. So their thoughts are not clear enough to be able to receive what God is speaking. Because a lot of times he's speaking in the still small voice. Just like when we see in the scriptures when Elijah was looking for God in the earthquake, he was looking for God in the cave. He found him in the cave, but he was looking for him in the earthquake, the fire, the storm, all these things. But he was speaking to him in the cave, the still small voice. Okay, so in order to receive the still small voice, you gotta make space. You gotta get rid of even influences and desires in your heart, clouding your thinking, making you see things a certain way. You gotta make space. You gotta make a situation where God has room to be himself in your life and speak to you. You have to get rid of some of your own human thoughts, your own human inclinations, your own human wisdom, okay, out of the way, so God and the scriptures and the things that he's already given you can make themselves reign supreme, okay? And you got to make space in order to do that. That's a very critical and important step, okay? Making space, okay? And my next step, okay? My next step, step 3, being honest with yourself. Being honest with yourself. Testing everything. Okay, you got to be able to test what you're hearing, what you're being given, all of that. Okay, this is a very critical component, because if you get this step wrong, you're going to think any and every voice that you hear in your thoughts, or even if it's demonic or whatever, you're gonna think it's God, because eventually that stuff is gonna try to pretend to be God. That's how it try to get you. Okay, so check this out. If you do this long enough, you're gonna hear some of these spirits and some of this stuff in your head. It's gonna try to pretend to be God, and you have to test it. And you have to find something to test it outside of yourself and your own feelings. Otherwise, you're just following your own human nature. Okay, you're just following your own human desires and calling it God. A lot of people don't get this right. A lot of people don't have no way to test whether something God's voice or not. Okay, because they're not honest enough with themselves to evaluate what something is outside of their own thinking and their own desire. So you got to be able to test it. Okay, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Some of the ways is asking God specifically for an external sign. Okay, asking Him specifically, and if you don't have the faith, you know, God will supply that if you're not testing Him, right? So if you need a sign to say, oh well, I don't know whether I'm supposed to go to here or here, tell God, hey, look, I need you to send somebody to confirm it, and leave it out of your own hands. Okay, if you do things like that and you apply all the other stuff, God will be the one to answer your test. He'll answer your question, just like he supplied Gideon with the fleece. Okay, when he didn't have the strength and the faith to believe, okay, he came to him and he gave him that fleece. Okay, so God can do the same thing for you. Okay, when they were casting lots, when they kicked Jonah out the boat, okay, they cast lots, the lots landed on him. Okay, so God can move in that space if you're really seeking Him and trying to find Him. Okay, and that's a heck of a lot better. See, a lot of people will criticize you for doing this, but it's a heck of a lot better than following your own thoughts, your own inclinations, and doing what you feel, where there's no accountability other than what some other person that wants to prosper off you, or you want to prosper off yourself, is doing. Okay, so when you test things outside of yourself, okay, whether it's saying, hey God, show me this sign, or show me this situation, or show yourself outside of my own thinking, okay, then your heart is open for what the truth really is. And that's where you always have to be when you're seeking God's voice.